And not unrelated, because it's largely climate change which is driving all this. Of course, we've seen this move for Energy UK. What's happening there?
Yes, well, this effectively is an extension from a segment that Ben was dealing with on Monday, talking about the ending of coal power as part of the composition of the UK's power energy grid, electrical energy grid. And I reported on this back in March using a headline from the energy system operator, which I'll come on to in a minute, but saying that the government has set a clear deadline for coal-fired power station to cease production by October. So they did actually hit that target. But what are the implications going to be? This goes back a little bit further before the national grid was effectively sort of pushed to one side. And they asked the question back in 2022, how will our electricity supply change in the future? And the answer is that the global ambition to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 means we'll likely be using more electricity than ever before in the coming years. So we'll see how this circle gets squared. They go on to say that in 2020, fossil fuels made up 84% of the global energy mix, but this will need to fall to less than 20% by 2050 in order to reach net zero. It's estimated that electricity consumption in the UK and the US will increase by approximately 50% by 2036 and more than double by 2050. So in order to meet that goal, apparently we now have the National Grid ESO, so the effectively what's now called the National Energy System Operator. They have a new smart website, and they've also put out a short video to explain a little bit about what it is that they are up to.
Right across the business, there's a team of really capable, innovative people who are hugely excited about the opportunity that NESO presents at this inflection point in tackling climate change, which truly is the challenge of a generation.
Fundamental to NESO is the ability to bring an impartial, independent voice into the mix that can really take a whole systems view on the transition, the challenges, the trade-offs that need to be made, and ultimately how do we get an optimal outcome for consumers.
So looking at the whole system together will create the opportunity for us to have an efficient transition and a speedy transition. That's why NESO is so important. The local environment will be cleaner with less air pollution. It'll mean jobs and the opportunity for people to see the benefits of a decarbonised energy system in their locality.
Now, what's going to be important is that industry and government and other stakeholders collaborate really closely as we move down these paths, because the answer today won't necessarily be the answer tomorrow.
It's about ensuring that whole ecosystem comes together to deliver for the country.
Sounds brilliant, Charles.
Well, it does. And there's a lot to pull out from that video. If you either couldn't quite see the screen closely enough, or indeed you were only listening, the lady speaking towards the end was called Jane Too Good to Be True, which it does seem to be. There was very little talk about how they were going to produce the requisite amount of electricity, and phrases like the answer today might not necessarily be the answer tomorrow is slightly alarming, but of course suggests that the renewable energy, because of course this is all about net zero and the spectre of climate change, rather than in actual fact producing the energy that could or should be required. So it's a very muddled approach from NESO. And of course, the other thing that's worth pointing out at this stage is that the demand, or the increase for electricity, is in large part going to be to satisfy the enormous increase of the use of artificial intelligence and indeed the data centres that are supposed to be sustaining all life as we know it. But we'll go on and have a look back at the NESO website, because I think it bears scrutiny, and you'll see highlighted on the right-hand side, they have a tab entitled Energy Outages, which seems a slightly pessimistic thing to put on the front page of your website when you're meant to be producing the electricity. But we might have an insight as to why they would put such a thing. They're also advertising what's called a carbon intensity API, which is an application programming interface, effectively allowing other agencies to take data off their website. They say the goal of this API service is to allow developers to produce applications that will enable consumers and or smart devices to optimize their behavior to minimize CO2 emissions. So the standout word there is behavior. This is to do with changing people's behavior. They then go on to say that the WWF, which in this case is the World Wildlife Fund, have implemented the API into a reusable widget that can help people plan their energy use, switching devices on when energy is green and off when it's not. This really is about behavioural change. And just to reinforce the point, they put a graphic up on the website which shows here, again, if you can't see it, it's a table, effectively a timetable for your day, showing that how intense the carbon is, and at between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. in the evening, they're encouraging you to unplug your electricity. Now, another phrase used during that video was impartial and independent. It is no such thing. Another influence behind the scenes, or at least actually referred to, is the Environmental Defence Fund of the effectively sort of European Union offshoot in some ways, shown here to be supported by the Bezos Earth Fund, one of many donors to the value of well over $100,000 in the year. So, of course, there are many, many external influences. And then the other thing that we go back to, this is again from the UK Column News back on 13th of March, was the article that the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had put in the Daily Telegraph, in which he points out that when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, this is how we will keep your lights on and your bills down. It is the insurance policy Britain needs to protect our energy security while we deliver our net zero transition. He then goes on, of course, to try and explain why these things are so challenging. He says you can't protect national security without delivering energy security. The war in Ukraine reminded us all of that. A nation that is dependent on the whims of dictators for its energy supply can never be truly safe. But just how genuine is all of this, especially when we're considering enormous price hikes in the value of electricity? So we'll just have a look at the most recent graph from Trading Economics showing the wholesale price of electricity. Clearly massive spikes seen across 2022 and 2023, but in actual fact, the price listed at the moment just over 83, not enormously much higher than that of 2020 or 2021. And yet, of course, we are being primed not just for huge increases in the price of electricity, but also for either outages or behavioural conditioning to make sure that we're not going to use electricity, and we're certainly not going to use it if it's not so-called green or clean.
Indeed.